Specialized senses. Specialized senses session learning objectives are: describe the general function of sensory receptors as transducers, describe the structures of the eye, describe the concept of light refraction, define phototransduction, compare and contrast the two general types of photoreceptors including their photopigment, explain the bleaching reaction and how it relates to dark adaptation and light adaptation, describe the visual pathway from photoreceptors to the brain, describe the structures of the outer, middle, and inner ear, describe the components of the cochlea and how they function in sense of hearing, trace the path of sound wave from the outside of the ear to the stimulation of the vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8, describe the auditory pathway from stimulation of the vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8 to the brain, describe the structures of the inner ear involved in equilibrium, describe the physiology behind olfactory and how it relays sensory input to the brain, describe the physiology behind the 5 types of taste and how it relays sensory input to the brain. Alright folks, let's get started. Specialized senses. All receptors perform the function of responding to stimuli and initiating sensory input to the CNS. Changes in our sensory information that receptors detect in our external and internal environments are called as stimuli. These sensory receptors can act as transducers by changing one form of energy, the original form that it takes in, to a different form of energy, usually electrical, along the neurons to the CNS. There are different kinds of receptors. Some, like photoreceptors, pick up light, mechanical receptors that pick up mechanical force, and chemoreceptors that respond to chemical compounds. Sensory receptors are unique because our conscious awareness of incoming sensory information reaches our cerebral cortex, and that's then interpreted as a sensation. The sensory input is then filtered by our thalamus and then relayed to different parts of our brain for processing. The modality or the form of the stimulus is provided by a given type of sensory receptor that relays that sensory input along the sensory neurons to the brain. Therefore, the CNS, our brain, can interpret the relative intensity of a stimulus because of the change in number of nerve signals that it generates along the nerve. So a greater stimulus results in more sensitive receptors sending signals more frequently, and less sensitive ones send less. The signals received by receptors are then transduced to the brain for interpretation. So let's summarize what we said, is that the sensory receptor must be able to provide our CNS with several characteristics of the stimulus that includes the modality, the location, intensity, and duration. Let's start with the special senses vision. The visible spectrum is the wavelength of light that can be detected by the human eye. So it's a very small window right between the UV and the IR specs. As you can see right here, it's between 400 to 700 nanometers in wavelength, and this is visible spectrum. Everything above that and below that is not visible. As you go from the left to right side, you're increasing wavelength. Going from the right to left, you are increasing frequency. Accessory structures of the eye. So we have eyebrows and eyelids, and the eyebrows prevent sweat from dripping into the eye. Eyelashes prevent foreign debris from contacting the eye surface. And then we also have these sensory receptors associated with the base of the eye, like the eyelashes that cause the blink reflex. The upper eyelids are called the palpebrae. These are covering to protect the eyes. Each eyelid is formed by this fibrous core called the tarsal plate. And then we also have these muscles like the levator palpebral superioris muscle, which is the upper eyelid muscle that helps keep the eye open. The free margins of the eye slit is termed the palpebral fissure, and they converge together. And then on the edges we have the canthi. The crystal clear window is called the cornea, and the white part of the eye is called sclera. There's this continuous transparent mucous membrane called the conjunctiva that covers the interior part of the eye, and it contains globule cells and stratified columnar epithelium. The lacrimal apparatus produces, collects, and drains lacrimal fluid, basically tears, in an effort to help reduce any kind of eyelid friction. It also helps cleanse and moisten the eye and prevent any bacterial infection, and it uses antibacterial enzyme called lysozyme to help clean this. The lacrimal gland constantly produces lacrimal fluid so that it washes away just by blinking. The lacrimal fluid transfers from the lacrimal gland across the eye to the lacrimal carbuncle, and it drains down into the lacrimal sac, and through the lacrimal sac it goes down to the nasolacrimal duct and then out the nasal cavity. Let's talk about the extrinsic and intrinsic muscles of the eye. So we have the superior rectus, which moves the eye upward, inferior rectus, which moves the eye downward, the superior oblique muscle that depresses the eye and moves it laterally, the inferior oblique, which will elevate the eye and move it laterally, the lateral rectus will move it laterally, and the medial rectus moves it medially. These control the movement of the eye, and anchors it into the orbital fissure. The anatomy of the eyeball. Most of the fibrous tunic is the sclera, or the white part of the eye, which is mostly composed of irregular connective tissue, and it contains both collagen and elastic fibers. On the posterior side of it, we have the optic nerve, which contains a sheath and extension of dura mater that sends information to the brain. The cornea, as we said, is a crystal clear window in front of the eye, helps refract the light coming in, and the cornea is considered avascular and emerges with the sclera of the eye. The vascular tunic, which is the layer that contains blood vessels, lymph vessels, and the intrinsic muscles of the eye, has three regions. The choroid is going to be the region that is made of highly vascular areolar connective tissue, supplies the retina with nutrients, absorbs extraneous light, and also has melanin. The ciliary body in the front upholds the lens, keeps it in place, and it secretes a fluid called the aqueous humor in the front part of the eye. The color part of the eye is called the iris, made of smooth muscle, and then the pupil is the opening that controls the diameter of how much light comes in, and then the internal layer of the eye is called the retina. The choroid provides some vitamin D for the photoreceptors, and it helps allow diffusion of nutrients and oxygen to that neural layer where there's going to be the compound of the photopigment molecules and the protein rhodopsin. The inner neural layer is where all the photoreceptor cells are located and responsible for vision by absorbing light rays and converting them into nerve signals. The macula is the central point of the retina. The fovea is a center field of view that contains the highest amount of rods and cones, located right around the macula right here. Refraction of the light in the eye. The primary process of vision include the refraction and focusing of light on the retina, and then phototransduction and relaying the sensory input along the visual pathways. Light rays are straight as they first enter the eye, but the ability to see clearly requires them to bend or refract the light so that they hit right onto the retina at the fovea centralis. These light rays are refracted upon the passage between these densities of fluids and also the curved surfaces of the cornea and the lens. There's a number given representing the comparative density is called the refractive index. The greater that refractive index, the greater the refraction of the light rays. So before the light can reach our photoreceptor cells, it must pass through the air, pass through the cornea, go through the aqueous humor, the lens, the vitreous humor, and eventually hit onto the retina. So you can see that the change of a light speed from one medium to another one is causing it to bend. So light transmits normally straight. Reflection causes it to bend backwards. Refraction causing it to go at an angle. And that angle is going to be the refractive index. Likewise over here, for the convex lens, as the light rays come straight in, it's going to curve in as it hits the cornea and the aqueous humor, and also the lens, and now bends down. And as long as it hits onto the fovea, your vision can be clear. Focusing of the light. The process that occurs in the eye for us to see clearly depends on how far away the object is we are viewing. So to be able to view an object at an average of 20 feet, the extrinsic muscles align our eyes forward. The intrinsic ciliary muscles are relaxed so that the ciliary bodies move away from the lens, putting the tension on the ligament, which flattens the lens out. So when the ciliary muscles contract, those fibers begin to be loose, the lens will relax into a thicker shape, causing us to have an increased refractive power to be able to bend more light. When the ciliary muscles relax, the fibers are going to be maintained taut. The lens are then pulled into a flatter position, decreasing the refractive power. So it is important that the parasympathetic system is able to control the amount of light and be able to change the way the ciliary muscles either contract or relax. The lens does decrease its elasticity as we get older, and therefore it can lead to a natural onset of myopia or hyperopia, which is nearsightedness or farsightedness. So in a normal sight, the light rays enter the eye and they hit the cornea and the aqueous humor, and then the lens, and it bends onto the fovea centralis, and you can see clearly. In a nearsighted or myopic situation, the eyeballs are a little bit bigger. As a result, as the light rays enter, it bends and it hits in front of the focal point, causing the vision to be blurry. In farsighted or hyperopic vision, the light rays come in, bend at the cornea, and eventually bend onto a point behind the retina, causing you to have blurry vision. So the ability for the ciliary muscles to change the lens is called accommodation. And whenever the focal point is either in front or behind the eyeball, then we can correct this with an actual prescription lens.